So you kind of follow the money. And that's why the company was really caught, what I say, between a BlackRock and a hard place. I always say they never should have done a partnership with Donald Trump, or they should have done a partnership with Dylan Mulvaney.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Anson Frericks. He is the author of a new book called Last Call for Bud Light, The Fall and Future of America's Favorite Beer. Anson, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
Hey, Thomas, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
So everybody knows the story of Bud Light, at least the most recent story, but you talk about in the book how all of the things that sort of led up to this moment, the decision that was made to do this partnership with Dylan Mulvaney, this all started years before that by the change in the corporate culture. Can you walk us through that and explain that in a little more detail?
Yeah, definitely. So everyone knows the Dylan Mulvaney story. I think what this book really goes into detail in is that this was really, almost 15 years in the making. A lot of people don't realize that Anheuser-Busch, for example, is no longer an American-owned company. In 2008, it was bought by a European company called InBev. And then over the next 15 years, you really saw the company really change from the sort of great American iconic company owned by the Bush family, been owned for almost 4 generations or managed by the Bush family for 4 generations. And then that really changed. Over the next 15 years, you had this new European ownership group with this InBev company, brought in its own managers from Europe. They moved the headquarters, the sales and marketing headquarters from St. Louis, Missouri, where Anheuser-Busch had always been, moved it to New York City, hired very different people in New York City, hired different marketing agencies in New York City, did different partnerships in New York City. Also as well, they adopted sort of this new kind of corporate, I would say, purpose, which was no longer around focusing on shareholders and shareholder capitalism like we had in the US for a long time since Milton Friedman in the 1970s. But in really the 2017, 2018 timeframe, adopted this more European stakeholder capitalism model, which is based kind of on the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum view of the world, that businesses are supposed to serve all stakeholders. And then downstream of that got involved in a lot of ESG, environmental social governance, and then DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion policies that all sort of manifested itself with not only the Dylan Mulvaney partnership, but then I also think the company's bungled response to it, where they could not clearly articulate who Bud Light was going to serve as a customer moving forward.
Yeah, and when did you join the company again? It was like 2011, is that right?
So 2011. So I joined the company after this company InBev had bought Anheuser-Busch. And even InBev, they have a whole history. It was really, originally it started as a roll-up in South America, where this group of Brazilian bankers kind of rolled up South America. Then they bought Europe, the company called InBev, which owned Hoegaarden, Stella Artois left. Then they bought Anheuser-Busch. They recruited me to the company based off this promise of meritocracy, and also that we needed more American leaders that could understand the beer business and help them really grow the business in the US. I think that part of that was true, but unfortunately, I think sort of the culture of this more European kind of firm unfortunately overtook sort of Anheuser-Busch, and a lot of the values from Europe came and overtook a lot of the American values over the last 10 or 15 years. And I left really a year before the Dylan Mulvaney partnership to actually co-found a company called Strive with a friend of mine named Vivek Ramaswamy. And our whole idea was to originally invest only in businesses that were going to be focused on their shareholders, focused on their customers. And so really it was kind of this, my worlds collided when I had started a company called Strive to actually focus customer or businesses back on their customers. And then Anheuser-Busch became, I think, the poster child of everything that went wrong with, call it the stakeholder capitalism, ESG and DEI movement in America.
So I guess you're going to be voting for Vivek in the Ohio governor's race since you're in Cincinnati.
I was at his kickoff event a week ago, and I like his policies. If he can get us to 0 state income taxes and 0 property taxes in Ohio, I'm on board with that.
But I was going to ask you, so you were really there and watched the ESG and the DEI stuff sort of blossom inside of one of the largest companies. As you said, it's a European company, but did all of that really accelerate after 2020? I feel like there was a moment, or was it even earlier? I know in 2017, we had this, when Trump first came into office in January 2017, I remember talking about CEOs. There was the quote unquote Muslim ban, and all these CEOs, they were being pressured, and they started releasing statements, and they started taking positions on social issues, which I had never seen before. And I thought to myself, why would they be doing this? They're going to be out there, putting a stake in the ground that may end up alienating, half of their potential customer base. It didn't make any sense to me, but obviously that's what happened. And Bud Light obviously got caught up in that.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't make any sense to me either. But I think some of the seeds of that were actually sown really in sort of the 2008 financial crisis. And if you recall that there was a lot of banks that got bailed out, whereas people felt that mainstream Americans, they lost their houses in the subprime mortgage crisis, and a lot of banks got bailed out. There was this whole Occupy Wall Street movement that popped up in kind of 2011. And then so for a lot of banks in New York, and large asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, that are the three largest asset management companies, control $20 trillion worth of assets, bigger than the GDP of the US. They started to try and repair their image, trying to adopt these European philosophies, again, ESG, DEI, stakeholder capitalism. And that really went on steroids, I think, in the 2016, 2017 timeframe when Trump was first elected. And you had a lot of progressive pension funds then put their money into BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, state of California, state of New York. European sovereign wealth funds invested into BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. And they started saying, if Trump is going to pull out of things like the Paris Climate Accords, if Trump is going to pull out of the Human Rights, UN Human Rights Coalition, if Trump is going to sign this Muslim ban, well, we all of a sudden feel that government is failing to solve these existential crises of climate change and or of immigration and of certain human rights issues. So we now want business to solve these issues. And so Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, wrote a very polarizing letter to all the CEOs of corporate America. And BlackRock is one of the largest shareholders in every single publicly traded company. But he essentially said that business now has to earn their social license. And this was in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, and that he was going to force companies to start adopting policies. And he helped evolve the purpose of a corporation from one of shareholder value and shareholder capitalism, as Milton Friedman said, to this more European stakeholder capitalism model to satisfy more of these progressive pension funds and his European clients. So that really sort of set the stage where now CEOs were being compelled to speak out. And then really that went on. They got really put into turbo charge mode after COVID. During COVID, there was this existential crisis of COVID. And so companies got really pushed off their mission towards making political statements of COVID. George Floyd as well, I think, was another piece that really pumped this up as well, where all of a sudden companies were supposed to solve this crisis of systemic racism post George Floyd. You saw almost $200 billion was committed to the Black Lives Matter, for example, from CEOs. In the aftermath of that, even though even BLM was very controversial with some of their statements about destabilizing the nuclear family. And then, of course, that they were very supportive of Palestine and Hamas after Hamas attacked Israel. So they become a very controversial organization. But those two events, I mean, really, it's three events, I guess. Larry Fink, the involvement in stakeholder capitalism, COVID, and then George Floyd really got companies involved in a lot of social and political issues over the last couple of years.
We're speaking with Anson Frericks. He is the author of a new book called Last Call for Bud Light. It's right there. I highly recommend it. Gives you sort of a inside look at what went on in that company leading up to the Dylan Mulvaney disaster. Let's talk about that for just a second. We're running short on time, and I want to get to where Bud Light is and whether they've made a recovery. But first, talk for a second. I know you said, I think you left the company before, but I'm sure you had friends. I mean, what was your sense of what it was like inside that company as they watched, what was it, $20 billion of value wiped off the books in a matter of days and weeks as this thing just kind of spiraled out of control? It seemed like they were caught off guard and then, to your point, really didn't know how to respond.
No, you're right. And I mean, I'll even back up. A year before the Dylan Mulvaney partnership, I left the company. And one of the reasons I left was I was president of Anheuser-Busch sales and distribution in the US. And I tried to do a partnership with Black Rifle Coffee Company to distribute Black Rifle Coffee Company products in the same trucks that were carrying Bud and Bud Light. And our external affairs group and our legal team based in New York, they said I couldn't do it. And I said, why not? I mean, it makes tons of financial sense. We're going to make a lot of money. And they essentially said, this is too controversial. It's too political. Black Rifle Coffee said, why? I mean, their mission is to serve coffee and culture to firefighters, police officers, and people who love America. And they said, well, they've just gotten involved in too many kind of political issues. I said, that's crazy. So they killed this partnership. One of the reasons I left the company, because I thought that our group in New York didn't really understand the customer. And then a year later, so I mean, I wasn't really that surprised when that same group that killed the Black Rifle Coffee deal greenlit the Dylan Mulvaney partnership, because the company had adopted a lot of DEI commitments, diversity, equity, inclusion commitments, which they would report back to the BlackRocks and other asset managers, which would therefore include Anheuser-Busch and certain funds and ESG funds and others. So you kind of follow the money. And that's why the company was really caught, what I say, between a BlackRock and a hard place. Dylan Mulvaney partnership didn't make any sense because Bud Light was always a brand that was non-political. It was about humor. It was about fun. It brought Americans together, enjoyed by Democrats and Republicans alike. I always say they never should have done a partnership with Donald Trump, or they should have done a partnership with Dylan Mulvaney. Just stick to doing partnerships with sort of just sports stars and kind of humorous, funny folks that are not politicized.
Right.
So that's why that partnership didn't make sense. But even the company, even afterwards, could never articulate about why they did the partnership with Dylan. They couldn't stand by Dylan, nor could they kind of apologize to their loyal customer base that was leaving them by the millions on a daily basis.
And so we have, Bud Light's trying to sort of make a comeback, and they've hired Shane Gillis, who, is a funny dude, no question about it, but also, somewhat controversial. And I know he was just hosted Saturday Night Live again after being, they rejected him back in the day because he had said some things that were, off-color jokes or whatnot. And I also thought a key moment was when I saw that Dana White from the UFC came out in support of Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch and said, look, we're doing partnerships with them. They get America. And anybody who thinks otherwise can just kind of pound sand. But so has Bud Light, has Anheuser-Busch, have they made a recovery? Will they ever be able to totally undo the damage that was done by that one single decision?
No, I mean, they haven't made a recovery really at all. So if you go back at this point, almost 2 years, Bud Light was the biggest beer brand in the United States. And since that happened, the first year, they lost about 30% of their Bud Light sales. They've been down about 10% last year, and they're trending this year down another almost 10%. So they're going to lose almost 50% of their sales on Bud Light in the last 2 years. The company in the United States used to do about $6 billion worth of profits. Now they're doing $4 billion worth of profits. Almost $2 billion of profits are gone. You mentioned this company lost over $20 billion of market share and market cap. The stock is still well below where it was before this controversy happened. The company has had to have fired thousands of employees. Suppliers have gone out of business. I mean, it's really sad where it is. And the one thing that I don't think Anheuser-Busch and some of the European board members and executives really get about the Americans, Americans are pretty forgiving. And yes, people like Dana White have come back to the brand, but Dana White got a $100 million check from the company. Shane Gillis gets millions of dollars of money. I think what the American population has not gotten is still sort of a formal just apology. And I always say, like, the path to redemption, it goes through forgiveness. But to be forgiven, you have to admit there was a mistake, and the company still has not done that. And so I don't think until the company admits there's a mistake that was made, the people will come back. And I also think at this point, it wouldn't even be genuine coming from the current administration. So my view is that since the company is European owned, foreign owned, they're actually better off probably almost selling the US business unit at this point, sell it back to, I don't know, Warren Buffett, or sell it back to some other American who can buy the brand back, talk that now it's in the hands of, once again, Americans with American values. We screwed up with what Bud Light did historically, but now moving forward, we now have the right people in charge and who are going to get this brand back to greatness. And Americans love a great American comeback story. So I think they can do that, but I don't know if it's going to be under the current ownership.